I'm very excited as chair of League of Women Voters of Door County to be introducing our speaker this morning, Meagan Wolfe. Meagan serves as the state's chief election official. She was appointed by the bipartisan 6-member commission in February 2018 and unanimously confirmed by the Wisconsin State Senate in May of 2019 for a 4-year term. Serving as an election security advocate and ambassador for the needs of Wisconsin's clerks and voters has been her highest priority. A significant part of her job is ensuring that Wisconsin's 1,922 local election officials, the most of any state, have the resources and technology they need to conduct elections. Meagan previously served as Wisconsin Election Commission's Deputy Administrator and IT Director, managing the teams that develop and maintain the statewide voter registration system, election security, and all other IT applications of the Commission. Meagan joined state service in 2011, starting as the state's voter outreach coordinator and later as elections IT project manager, leading the multi-year redesign of the My Vote Wisconsin voter information portal, something that the League very much uses and depends on. If you have questions for Meagan, please post them in the chat. She'll try to answer as many as we have time for. Meagan, thank you so much for being here this morning, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so very much, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate it. Like a lot of you, this is one of the first weekends where I've had a chance to get back with family and whatnot. And I'm actually calling in today from a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Two Rivers, so not too far from where all you are, enjoying a celebration of a family anniversary. So kind of cool to get to join you from a historical place. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint here, so just bear with me for 1 second. All right. So as the generous introduction pointed out, I'm Meagan Wolfe. I'm the chief election official for the state of Wisconsin and the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. And I'll talk a little bit about how that position is actually really unique to a lot of other states and how we run elections. I'm also really proud to be Wisconsin's first female chief election official appointed in the state of Wisconsin. So in most other states, the chief election official is their secretary of state or another appointed individual. In my position, I'm actually required to be nonpartisan, but I'm the first woman to serve in this role. So today's presentation, I'm going to cover how we secure elections here in the state of Wisconsin. And this is something I really enjoy talking about. I think it's very important that folks know about the mechanics of how we secure our elections here in the state of Wisconsin. Who's involved in that process? What technology do we use? And sort of what aspects do we focus on when securing elections? Because it's not all about technology. A lot of it has to do with the human-driven process in elections as well. So let's kick it off with the who secures elections in Wisconsin, because this is where we'll get to sort of how our commission and everything is set up as well. So to start with, we do have some really good partners at the federal level that do help us with securing elections here in Wisconsin. So we work really closely with the Department of Homeland Security, with the FBI, with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. We're also members of a number of associations that allow us as election officials to coordinate with each other on important things like election security. So I actually serve on the executive committee of the National Association of State Election Directors, and also because of my position as Wisconsin's chief election official, I'm also a member of the National Association of Secretary of States, because more than 40 chief election officials in the country are secretaries of state. So let's talk a little bit about the Wisconsin Elections Commission, because this is a really different model, and I think a really important part of our story and of how elections are secured here in our state. So the Wisconsin Elections Commission is a 6-member bipartisan commission. So there are 3 Republicans and 3 Democratic representatives that are appointed by legislative leadership. And so that's the oversight body for our agency, our state agency. Then as the Wisconsin Elections Commission staff, I'm appointed by those 6 partisan commissioners, and they appoint an administrator to serve as the chief election official. And I am required by law, as is my staff, to be nonpartisan. So think of us as the factual experts on elections. I get to live and breathe elections and the mechanics of it. And, you know, from my perspective, there's no such thing as a good or a bad law. They're just laws that have been handed to me, court decisions that have been handed to me, and it's my job and my staff's job to implement them as they're handed to us. When there are issues that have to be sorted out in terms of how do we interpret something, how do we implement a court decision or a new piece of legislation, those are things that have to go before our commission. And then as staff, we bring them information, resources, so that they're able to deliberate and make their decisions about how we're going to implement those things. And actually, ironically enough, because it seems like everything always happens at the same time, this morning at 10:30, the commission is actually meeting because they have to approve ballot access for the special election in Assembly District 37. And last night was the challenge deadline. So today they're approving who's going to be on that primary ballot for that primary in June and that election in July. Another really cool thing I think about our agency, and this is a lot to do with our security story, is that we actually build and maintain all of our own technology. And I've had the great honor to be able to be very intimately involved in this process, as I did lead our IT teams in previous roles with the agency. But we actually have built our own statewide voter registration system. And what a statewide voter registration system is the system that all of our local election officials use to run an election. So everything from when they get nomination papers and determine who's going to be on a ballot, to registering voters, to issuing absentee ballots, all of those things happen in the statewide voter registration system. And because our state is so different, there's really not a product out there on the market that meets our needs in terms of our states and the technology we need to run a system like that, to have 3,000 users of that system. Most other states might have 50 or 100 users of their system. Because we're so decentralized, we have 3,000 users of our system. And so we developed our own system. We also developed the My Vote Wisconsin website. That is, you know, my baby, as it were. I was the IT project manager. I'm the one that did all of the usability studies to understand how people use our technology, what they needed, what we could do better. So all those things are things we actually build in-house. We've invested in our agency, in our IT staff, so that we're able to build and maintain and secure these systems ourselves. So we know every single move that's made in the statewide system. We're able to establish baselines and understand what's a normal day and what is anomalous behavior. And I really think this is one of the best decisions we ever made, was to build our own system, because it allows us to look at it all the time and determine, is this still meeting the needs of our state? Or are there any changes that we need to make? And so, you know, it might seem like kind of a tiny detail, but I think it's a really important part of our security story, is that this is our system that we built, and we're able to set the parameters for how we secure it. Another important role of our agency, in addition to building and maintaining technology, is providing training and guidance to our local election officials. So we do a lot of training, which I'll talk about more. And we also do a lot of memos and manuals and other guidance to the clerks about how to implement election laws at the local level. All right, and then also at the state, we have some other pretty cool partners. One is the Division of Enterprise Technology. So the Department of Administration, they have their Division of Enterprise Technology, and they're the ones that house the server infrastructure for the state of Wisconsin, including ours. And so we're able to focus on the development of the technology, the actual coding of the IT systems, and the security of specific election systems. And they take care of helping us to house and secure the actual server infrastructure. And so they're really important partners because they have just incredible folks that work over there that are able to make sure that our infrastructure is protected. One of the cool stories I like to tell about DET is that they block something like 80% of the emails that are sent to me as a state user of our email system, because up to 80% is either erroneous or some kind of malicious email that can be sent to state users. And they block all of that from even coming to us so that we don't have to sort through some of those emails and figure out what's malicious and what's not. They do all that work for us as state users. And so that's hugely important. We also have our Wisconsin Emergency Management, our National Guard, our Fusion Center. These are our law enforcement and our intelligence community partners here in the state. And we're really lucky to have all these folks working with us too, because they help to look at our state from a larger sort of vantage point to see what types of cyber incidents or what types of misinformation or disinformation might be happening that they're able to piece together to give us the intelligence information that we need to keep Wisconsin elections safe. We also work closely with folks like the DMV, Department of Corrections, Department of Justice, because every single day here in Wisconsin, we get data from those organizations that help us to keep our voter rolls accurate. So if somebody becomes a felon, or if somebody is now deceased, we get those records on a daily basis and are able to get that over to our local election officials so they can make determinations on if somebody is still eligible to vote or not. And if they're not, then they're removed from the list. And so those are also important partners because they provide us with a lot of data when we're looking to make sure that our lists are kept up to date. All right, county clerks. So county is where in most states, a lot of elections actually happen and a lot of the security stuff would happen. Here in Wisconsin, our county clerks are incredible partners, but they're not the ones actually running elections like they are in other states. So we do work with them a lot though, because I need them to be sort of our conduit to our municipalities. A lot of times as we have trainings or information we need to get to our locals, we need our counties engaged on those issues as well to help us with those things. Our counties did some just truly remarkable things in 2020 in terms of helping us to distribute supplies to the municipalities. So in April, when the courts said that we had to have an election in April, we needed the help of our county clerks to make sure that our municipalities had hand sanitizer, masks, all the things that were needed for that election. They helped us, as did the National Guard, buy those things and then distribute them out to the locals. They also helped us when we had to utilize our National Guard as poll workers. They actually helped us to figure out who needed poll workers and to help connect them with National Guard members that were actually living already in the 72 counties. And so they're really important partners, but they don't have the same traditional role in running elections like a county clerk would typically in other states. And you know, our counties are also, we have 72 of them, but just like our municipalities, there are big differences in terms of size, resources, technology infrastructure in a lot of our counties. You know, we have Menominee County, who has just over 4,000 in population. And then we have Milwaukee County that has over 1 million in population. And so these are very different types of jurisdictions with very different levels of resourcing. And so, you know, I think that's always a challenge too, because there's never a one size fits all in terms of how we partner with some of these jurisdictions. We also work closely with IT departments in the counties, with county emergency management, law enforcement, county land information offices. They're an important partner as we head into things like redistricting. We don't draw the lines, we're not involved in that process, but we do have to work with all the local officials to make sure that our mappings are all using the same language, so shall we say. So we have to make sure that all of our mapping softwares can communicate so that once the new lines are handed to us, we're all able to implement that data in the most accurate way. We even work with like the highways departments in some of our counties to make sure that on election day, if there were some type of weather emergency, that folks are still able to get to the polls, that the poll workers are still able to get to the polls, that we've thought about the fact that it's election day. Then we get to the municipal level. And from my perspective, this is really where elections happen. Our municipal clerks in this state are just, they're incredible. They're incredible. And I think this is such a great story. And it's something I love to talk about because I cannot believe how much they're able to accomplish at the municipal level. And in many cases, they're given very little to do their jobs. So Wisconsin has 1,850 cities, towns, and villages. And each one of those cities, towns, and villages has a municipal clerk who is the election official of that municipality. And those municipal clerks, they're responsible for running elections in their jurisdiction. So they're responsible for recruiting and training poll workers. They're responsible for voter registration that happens at the municipal level. They're responsible for processing absentee ballot requests, issuing absentee ballots. They're responsible for setting up their polling places, for setting up the municipal board of canvass. They're also responsible for recording all that work they do in the statewide voter registration database. Very few of our municipal clerks have IT support. So when I say that, I mean somebody that works for their municipality that has any sort of IT expertise. A lot of times our clerks may be the sole employee of their jurisdiction, and especially in our 1,200 townships, and they're expected to do elections, they're expected to do licensing, taxes, everything that has to happen in that township. And you know, with everything that needs to happen on computers now, they're also responsible for making sure their technology is secure, not just for elections, but for everything they do in that jurisdiction. When you think about who our local election officials are in Wisconsin, they represent about 1/6 of the local election officials in the country. Because again, most other states operate at the county level. So they might have 50 to 100 local election officials. We have 1,850 municipal election officials, plus our 72 counties. And so if you put all the local election officials from the country into one room, 1/6 of them would be from Wisconsin. Now, I think that sounds like a pretty fun room, but I think it's also, you know, really illustrative of the difference in terms of how we run elections. And that's all statutory too. That's certainly not a policy decision. That's how our laws are written, is to run them at the local level. 30% of these municipal clerks, they turn over every year. So every year, at least 30% of our municipal clerks are new. That averages out to about 12 new clerks every week. And after an election like 2020, that rates can often rise because those folks, especially in our townships, those clerks are usually only paid to work maybe 5 hours a week. They're very part-time. So 2/3 of our municipal clerks are part-time in that they probably work another full-time job or they might be retired, and they're paid by their township or their municipality to maybe work 5 hours a week. And that's 2/3 of those 1,850. And so, you know, in addition to not having on-site IT support, they just have very little time in general. And so I give them so much credit for the things they're able to accomplish in that small amount of time. And I think that goes to show why it's so important that we house and secure the technology at the state level so that they don't have to worry about that piece. We're able to help them with that piece. We're able to do that piece for them. In addition to our clerks, we have about 30,000 poll workers that are needed for a general election. So all of those 1,850 municipal clerks, they then have to work to recruit about 30,000 poll workers to make a general election work in our state. There are approximately 2,800 to 4,000 polling places then in our state, depending on the type of election. And just like our counties, our municipalities range greatly in terms of size. We have the city of Milwaukee, that's about 600,000 in population. And then we have really small townships. The example we have here has a population of 37. Right. And so it doesn't matter if you've got 600,000 people that are eligible to vote in your jurisdiction or 37, that clerk still has to run an election. That clerk still has to be able to set up their polling place, their voting equipment, use the statewide database, regardless of their size. We also try to engage other folks at the municipal level. So in municipalities where they do have IT support, we engage those folks to make sure they're aware of election-specific things, law enforcement at the local level, utility departments, school districts. School districts have elections themselves, and so they're a whole nother pool of election officials too that also have to be supported as part of this infrastructure. All right, and then, in addition to election officials, of course, I think everybody really helps and plays a role in securing elections. Voter advocacy groups, elected officials, campaigns, political parties, private industry, and voters themselves. I think we all play a role in making sure that folks have accurate information about elections so that we can help voters understand how it actually works and that they're exposed to correct information about elections. So let's get into the how a little bit and how elections are run here in the state of Wisconsin and how they're secured. So we really have three pieces of the puzzle in terms of election security here in the state of Wisconsin. And each of them are equally important and play a really vital role in that process. The first is that voter registration database. And I'll talk more about that because it's a huge system with a lot of really sophisticated things that happen to secure that system. Then we have voting equipment. So this is the actual tabulating equipment that's at the polls on election day. And I know for a lot of you on the calls, you're probably poll workers as well. Really appreciate your service. And I really appreciate the fact that a lot of you probably have some of this experience dealing with some of this technology at the polling place and on election day. The third piece of our puzzle for election security is training. So technology is one thing, but you have to train the humans. You have to make sure that the humans understand how to operate that technology securely and how to identify something that might be off. So the statewide voter registration database. So this is that system that I talked about at the beginning that we built here in the state of Wisconsin. And it's really an end-to-end system. And what that means is really every step of the process in elections is implemented as part of that system. It's a huge system. And what I mean by that is it's one of the largest systems in Wisconsin state government. So if you look at something like our budget system for the state of Wisconsin or other huge systems, they might use 1 to 2 servers in order to administer that process. Our statewide system is so large, it actually needs about 17 servers to run it. And that's because we have to have all of the mapping information for 10 million addresses. We have to have all the voter registration data, not just active registered voters right now, but history of all of that. Anytime anybody's ever voted or ever registered, we have to keep that history of that in there. Every time anybody's ever requested an absentee ballot or had a ballot counted for them, that history has to stay part of that record. And so it's a huge system. And if you can't tell, something I'm very proud of because I think it's something we do really well is build and secure our technology. It's also where we generate ballot styles. You've all worked with voters and understand that a lot of times folks don't understand that your address is tied specifically to your ballot, right? Your ballot could be different than your neighbor next door or across the street, depending on where the district and ward boundaries are drawn in your area. And so having a really sophisticated mapping system is so important to elections. It's one of the cornerstones because it makes sure that you get the right ballot. You get to vote for the candidates in your districts and wards. And so ballot styles is a big part of that. We've built a lot of technology in our system to make sure that when the clerks put in their registration data, when they put in their candidate data, that we're able to build an accurate system that issues the correct ballot to the correct voter. Voter registration. Each clerk is responsible for voter registration, but we also have a system that allows voters to register to vote online. The law says that if you're able to match your information from your voter registration with what's on file with the DMV, you're able to register to vote online. Otherwise, somebody needs to register at the polls or by mail or with their clerk, and their clerk is going to enter that data into the system. So again, we've built that infrastructure to allow them to do that securely. But one of the things that I think helps a lot with our system and is a huge plus of our decentralized system is that we have those 1,850 clerks that are running this process. They know their voters. They know what a usual day looks like. They know it would be strange if all of a sudden 100 new registrations showed up on their desk that didn't have addresses that they recognized, right? And so I think the fact that we have such a decentralized system really helps to secure the voter registration process because our clerks have such a local connection with their communities, right? They really understand what is a normal part of the voting process in their jurisdiction. So that's, sort of that technology paired with the human process that I really think makes that process secure. A lot of people don't even understand that every single voter that's issued a ballot, they have to be lawfully registered. So registration is always that first step before a clerk can ever issue a ballot, right? And we're able to maintain all those registrations in our statewide voter registration database so that if an absentee ballot request came in or a ballot came back from a voter that didn't put in a lawful request, those clerks always first have to check in the statewide voter registration database to make sure that that person is lawfully registered. If the person isn't lawfully registered and they requested or returned an absentee ballot, that ballot is not going to count. And so that's why that registration step is so important, because that's that first piece, and every single ballot has to be checked in and compared to that voter registration before it's going to be able to be counted or cast. Absentee, same thing there. Clerks are required by law to actually put in the data about every absentee that's requested and every absentee that is issued and counted into the statewide system. Because again, that allows us to check everything, not just at the municipal level, but at the state level, right? We can make sure that there's only one voter registration per individual and that only one ballot can ever count per registered voter. And that's a lot of the stuff that happens behind the scenes with that statewide system. Is every day, every hour, we're doing comparisons of the full list to identify any anomalies, to log every event, and to flag our local election official if somebody has registered again in a different jurisdiction or requested an absentee ballot in a different jurisdiction. They're going to be able to see that in real time and be able to take the action that they need to reach out to the voter, correct it, or in some cases make a referral if somebody has done something that is not lawful. Our voter registration system is where the poll lists are generated. So all of that work of making sure we've got data to keep the lists up to date, all the information about absentee ballots, that is all pulled into the poll list that's available at the polling places on election day. So the poll list is more than just a list of names. It actually has information about if that voter has requested an absentee ballot, if they've returned it. We even have supplemental lists that are available at the polls on election day, so that if somebody has become ineligible in the small amount of time between the poll list being printed and election day, that's still going to get caught. Because again, with the advances in technology, we're able to make sure that we have really accurate data that really is real time to make sure that, again, only eligible voters are able to cast a ballot. And then election results. So after an election, the clerks have to put all of the data from the election into the system, including voter participation, and ultimately where we certify the election results. Election certification happens on the human level in a lot of ways, but at the end of the process, once it's been canvassed and certified at each level of government, those election results are solidified there in the statewide system. And then all of this data we just talked about is actually available through the voter portal on myvote.wi.gov. So MyVote is really just a user interface for all the data that your local clerk is inputting. So if a clerk makes a mistake on your voter registration, you're not going to be able to find your record. If your clerk puts in information about your absentee being returned, but points out that you have a deficiency on there, you would be able to see that on the MyVote system. So it's a really powerful tool that, again, allows voters to see every aspect of their voter record through a user interface. But all of that data on MyVote is dependent on the 1,850 city, town, and village clerks. Again, those folks that are working 5 hours a week. It's dependent on them putting in all that information into the system because they are the custodians and the keepers of their voters' data. What about protections in that system? So I talked about all the important things that it does. How do we make sure that that data stays secure? And this is something that we have really focused on in the last 4 years is, again, to kind of follow through on our promise to our local election officials that they would not have to become cyber experts. They already have too much to do in that 5 hours that they're paid to be a clerk in their jurisdiction. And so we wanted to make sure that our systems were as usable and secure as possible without burdening our clerks with them having to know anything about cybersecurity. So one of the things that we did is we gave out grants to our local election officials. And we said, if you don't have a secure computer, right? Because a lot of these townships, they might not buy their clerk a computer. Or they ask their clerk to use the same computer for 15 years. And so the first question we asked is, do you have a secure computer? The second question we asked them is, do you have IT support? So do you have somebody you could call if you had an IT issue? And the third question we asked is, have you been able to go to cybersecurity training? Over 1,000 of our clerks in 2019 told us they did not have a secure computer, they did not have IT support, and they did not have access to training. And we were able to match them with all of those services. And we're very pleased to say that heading into the 2020 election, every single one of our local election officials had a secure device, had IT support, and had attended training on cybersecurity. We've also implemented what's known as multi-factor authentication into our system. And despite the fact we have more users of our system than any other state, we were the first ones to do it. And that meant sending out over 3,000 hard tokens to each of our local election officials so that when they log into the statewide system, they need their username, they need their password, but then they also need that hard token device that's been given to them. And so this makes sure that only people that should have access to the data have access to the data. We also have what's known as endpoint testing implemented as part of this statewide system. And what that means is that when a clerk goes to log in, so let's say they want to go log in to enter their voter registrations, first, our system is going to check their computer. It's going to check their computer to make sure that it's up to date, that it doesn't have any viruses, and that it meets the security protocols and policy of our system. If it doesn't meet those standards, or if there is some type of issue, then the clerk can't get in, but it also allows us to contact them and let them know that they have an issue and help connect them with the resources they need to get their computer actually fixed or updated. And so it's really a 2 points to having that in place. One is to protect our system so that nobody with a virus or any other issue can get into the system and cause damage. But two, it allows us to provide that service to our local election officials because a lot of times they might not know if they have a virus. They might not know if their system is out of date. And this allows us to alert them if we see any of those issues. We also have what's known as event monitoring built into our system. And what this means is that every day we're capturing every single footstep in our statewide system. So if somebody enters a voter registration, if somebody changes a single letter in somebody's name, we have all of those logs. And our system establishes a baseline. What is usual activity? And if anything deviates out of usual activity, it's going to let us know so that we can look into it. We've never seen any type of intrusion in our system, but this would allow us to very quickly identify if somebody that shouldn't have access in our system or somebody that's trying to tamper with our data is in there. We're going to be alerted immediately, and we'd be able to go back and see exactly what they did and to be able to restore our system to prior to when that bad guy got into the system. And so it's a really important system we hope we never have to use, but it allows us to see what a usual day is and flags us of anything unusual is happening in our system. And then we also have a lot of other folks that are assessing the traffic to the statewide server infrastructure, to our technology on a immediate basis. So our state and federal partners are always looking at every single hit to state servers to understand if they have legitimate business with the state or if it's some kind of intruder that they need to block. And that's happening all the time on state systems, on county systems, and on local systems with the help of our state and federal partners. So we also have a few other things that we do with that statewide system, because again, this is all the voter data in the whole state. This is really important stuff. And so let's say a clerk calls us and they do have some kind of issue, or on our endpoint detection, we see that they have a virus. We're actually going to connect them with what's called the cyber response team. And this is kind of like a volunteer firefighter program that utilizes state and local IT folks that can actually be deployed in their area to help a clerk if they have some kind of issue. And while that cyber response team is working on the clerk's device, we have a pool of loaner devices that we're able to overnight to that clerk so that they have something secure they can use to keep running their election. Because just because their computer is infected doesn't mean they get to stop their work that day. They still have to run their election. And so we have devices that we can send them. We also have a help desk. I think a lot of folks think our agency is a big agency, right? Because we do a lot. We always call ourselves the little agency that could, but there are actually only 31 people that work for the Wisconsin Elections Commission, including myself. And we have a really unique relationship with our local election officials. I always feel like we could do more for them. And I think they're just incredible partners, and I wish there was more we could do for them. But I think they trust us, and I think we have a really good relationship. And so we truly want them to call us if something's going wrong with their technology. I don't want them to feel embarrassed. I don't want them to feel like they need to hide this. I want them to call. And so we've actually set up a help desk, and we're even available 24 hours around an election, so that if a clerk experiences an event, that they call somebody. It's hard, I won't lie, with 31 people to make sure that we're able to provide that round-the-clock support. But I think it's really important because we want them to call somebody. And so really, we just try to be that first call where a clerk can let us know something's gone wrong, and then we can connect them with other resources regionally or at the state level to come help them with their issue. And we've helped a lot of our clerks as they migrated from Windows 7 to Windows 10. A lot of them didn't realize that their systems were out of date. And so we were able to detect that and help them with that transition. And we're also still helping a lot of our clerks to get on a government email. A lot of our local election offices don't have a government email account. They use a Hotmail or a Gmail or something else. And we're trying to get them all over to a government email, because that's really important, because it allows us to monitor and make sure that their email traffics are secure as well. All right, voting equipment. So voting equipment is something completely separate from that statewide database that we just talked about. So voting equipment, that's those tabulators at the polling place on election day. And because of our decentralized system here in Wisconsin, each of our local election officials gets to choose what type of voting equipment they would like to use. So there's not one system in place like there would be in some other states. And I think that's a really good thing, because somebody could not leverage a widespread campaign in our state to impact all of the voting equipment, right? Because there are so many different models, vendors, and types of equipment that are used in our state. Each clerk can choose from equipment that has been certified at the federal level and at the state level, and they can choose from that pool of equipment what they would like to use. And so that means we have a very decentralized system, and each clerk is using the equipment they think is going to work best for their community. Again, every piece of equipment, before a clerk can buy it, it has to first be certified by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and they work with a voting equipment testing lab, an independent lab, to go through the coding, to make sure there are no vulnerabilities before they approve it at the federal level. Then it comes to us at the state. We do a full test of that equipment as well. We take it out on the road. We test it in real life circumstances. We put together all of that data from our test. Then we bring it to the commission, who ultimately decides whether or not that system is secure and meets our statutory requirements. Once it's been approved at the state and the federal level, the clerks are then able to purchase that equipment. Before each election, each piece of voting equipment has to be tested. So every piece of voting equipment, the clerks have to publicly notice that they're testing their equipment, and they have to test it to make sure that it's performing like it should. And anybody can go and watch those tests in their local communities. Then after our general elections, we randomly select voting equipment, and those clerks have to actually perform a hand count to ensure that the paper ballots match with the voting equipment reported. And that happens after each general election. And the commission requires that at least 5% of all pieces of voting equipment in the state go through that test after an election. Now, again, it's random because that means we don't provide a roadmap to people about where we're going to be checking. We don't put out that list until after the election, and the voting equipment is actually tested before results are certified. So that way, if there was some kind of problem detected, we'd be able to fix that, look into it more before the results are certified. Every ballot cast in the state of Wisconsin has a paper trail. Every single one. So it doesn't matter what type of equipment you use, by law, we're required to have a paper trail. And that's really important, because if there were ever any kind of scrutiny, recount, you would always have that paper artifact. That's the official artifact of the election. Every single ballot cast has that paper trail. It's also important to note too, that on election night, those results that you see on the news, those are unofficial and are actually coming in from media stringers. They're not coming from an official source usually. And election results actually have to be certified at 3 levels of government, and that takes almost a month before they're official. And I really wish this was something that the media would report better on and that folks knew more about, because the things that happen after an election are so important. Each municipality has to reconcile all of their votes and make sure that things look correct before they certify it. Once they certify, it goes to the county, who has to do the same. They have to make sure that everything reconciles, and if it doesn't, they have to send it back to the municipality to fix any issues. Once all that's done, it has to come to the state, where again, we check all those results, make sure that things make sense. If there's any problem, if anything's off, then we send it back to the local level, and they have to tell us why before we can certify that election. Those are great things that are, really important to making sure that our results are accurate. And, I wish more people knew about all that work that went into that process, because I think it would help people feel better about the checks and the audits that go into making sure that our results are accurate. And each of these steps I just described, they're publicly observable. So the public can go watch the municipal board of canvass, they can watch the county canvass, they can even come watch us look through the data at the state level. So every single step of the process, how ballots are counted, is publicly observable. There is not a single thing in elections that happens in a dark room or behind a locked door. Every single aspect of it is publicly observable. Training, I'll just touch on this really briefly and then we'll go into some questions. But this is that human element. And we do a lot of work with our local election officials to make sure that they have security training. One of the biggest things we do is that before a clerk can even get a username and a password and that multi-factor authentication token from us, first they have to complete cybersecurity training. So we built interactive modules that they have to go through to learn about how to have a secure password, to learn about what is a phishing email and how to respond to something like that before we'll even give them credentials. We found a lot of our local election officials were not being given cybersecurity training from their municipality or from other places. So we created it, we provide that. We want to make sure that everybody has that baseline of security before they access our system. We also do things called tabletop exercises. And what this is where you actually simulate what a really bad election day would look like, and you practice what you would do to respond. So if it was a cybersecurity event where something was tampered with, or your voting equipment had issues, how would you respond? Who would you engage with? And we have a whole day that we set up with our clerks. We've done hundreds of these where we actually practice together. If we had a bad day, how would we respond together? And this played out so well in terms of helping us be prepared for 2020. You know, nobody could have guessed what we were going to run into. Even our craziest scenarios in our tabletop exercises couldn't have simulated some of the challenges of 2020. But that being said, we had been working so hard with our local election officials to prepare for how we would coordinate together if there was something unexpected that happened. And even though the scenarios looked different in 2020, we were able to work together so well. And those local election officials, in my book, they're heroes because they were able to step up to those challenges. They followed our guidance as we put it out, and we made sure that they all had what they needed and they were able to implement it at the local level. So I'm very grateful for their engagement in those trainings and for them actually putting all of that into practice as was needed in 2020. We also do a lot of training on communications. A lot of times security isn't even an IT problem, it's a communications problem. It's making sure that you have answers to people's questions. When somebody comes to you with an issue as an election official and says that they believe something that they've heard, a rumor they've heard about security or technology, to that person it's real. And so as election officials, we need to have the facts. We're not here to make anybody feel bad about what they believe or information they believe to be true. We're here to provide them with the facts. And so we do a lot of work with our local election officials to make sure they have the facts about how we secure our data, about how voting equipment is tested and secured, so that they can help answer questions that their voters might have. Voters trust their local election officials. We actually did a statewide survey, and as you might expect, we found that voters are much more likely to trust their local election officials than they are to even trust us at the state. And so a lot of the communication tools we put together are designed for our locals so that they can engage with their voters where it matters. What's next? So we're continuing to sort of debrief from 2020, continuing to make sure that we have what we need to be able to do even better as we head into the 2022 elections, continue to work with our local election officials. We have regular meetings with our clerks. They help to advise all of our initiatives. They help us to debrief on what did we learn from 2020? What do we want to do that's better? And we're able to work together on these various initiatives. We are also going to continue to work with our public health officials and our physical security advisors. Unfortunately, there's been a shift where some more physical security measures are needed for election officials as well. And so we continue to partner with all those folks I just talked about to make sure that we understand what went well and what didn't go well in 2020, and that we can all work together to make sure that we're able to make improvements as we head into the 2022 election. So that's all I have for all of you. Thank you so much for all that you do. Again, I recognize that a lot of you are poll workers and some of this might not be new to you, but I really appreciate you having me here today. I appreciate the fact that you're interested in this and want to know more about how we secure elections here in Wisconsin. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for playing your role in securing elections. And if you ever have any questions for us, please send an email to our help desk. We can connect you with one of our election experts to discuss your question. But with that, I'll turn it back over to all of you for any questions that you might have for me.
Do we want to continue to record in the questions? Any thoughts? We do have questions in the chat box.
I do think the questions and answers are worthy for others to hear.
Sounds good.
My opinion.
So, Meagan, can you see the questions in the chat box, or you want us to read them and let's?
Yeah, I can. So it looks like we've got a question from Dan Powers that says there's multiple proposed bills that may affect voting. Example, polling observers being 3 feet away. Was WC consulted about the reality of these effects? I am always willing to talk to anybody about sort of the factual mechanical impact of any of the laws that are being proposed. And so, yes, certainly we have been consulted about that. In a matter like this, a lot of times I do tell the legislators that they should talk to their local election officials because they're going to have a little more of that practical on the ground experience about how some of these things play out. But, you know, I spend a lot of time talking to any legislators that have questions for me or are interested in making sure that they understand the practical piece of it. You know, again, I'll never weigh in on if I think a law is good or bad. Those are policy decisions for our lawmakers, but I will always provide sort of that factual impact and help connect them with local election officials who might be able to answer their questions. Because you're right, you know, some of these have downstream effects on their ability to recruit poll workers, maintain order at the polling place. And so I think those are really important parts of the conversation. Next question I have from Pat is, over the past few years, considering the security systems in place, how many fraudulent votes have you found? So there are a number of different ways where we detect any sort of fraud, duplicate activity in our systems. One, and you might have seen the news yesterday, is that local election officials, they are always looking at data and participation data in their municipality. And when they detect any sort of fraud, they refer that to their district attorney. And so it looks like there were fewer than 40 cases after the 2020 general election where clerks made that type of referral to their district attorney. We also do additional audits in our system. So one that we also have completed that goes before the commission on June 2nd is we also work with Department of Corrections to see if anybody who was a felon did participate in the election. Those are then referred to the district attorney. It's usually a very, very small number, but of course we want to catch any of these things. And then finally, another thing that happens, and this will happen a little bit later this summer, is we actually get a list through a consortium of state data known as ERIC that compares voter participation across the country to see if anybody might have voted twice, once in Wisconsin and once in another state, or even twice within Wisconsin. And then the commission actually makes referrals based on that data. And all of that is publicly available. So you can see all those audits that have been done after every single election. And you can see the volume of referrals that are ultimately made to the district attorneys. It is always a very small number. And it doesn't seem to be that, you know, that number is not out of line, I guess, with what we've seen in previous elections. I've never seen one where it's over 50 voters in the state that have had some type of referral made. Then we have another message from Pat that says the league is very interested in making sure that everyone eligible to vote has access to the right to vote, especially people who do not have internet access or access to transportation. What can WEC do to support more access? That's a great question, but I think that is not the statutory role of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. And, you know, I work with, my first job in elections was working with voters. So I probably have actually talked to some of you over the years. I was, you know, going out around the state talking to groups, leagues about the implementation of the photo ID law, talking to any voter that would listen. So I've done a lot of work with voters, and it's certainly something, you know, I can say I care about, but I also have an obligation, as does our agency, to adhere to what we're statutorily charged with. And we're statutorily charged with, again, implementing the law. And so a lot of the things that help with transportation or other issues really do come from groups that are working directly with voters. We're here to provide the framework, the technology, the interpretations of statute, and make sure that people understand what the law says and what the law allows. But in terms of actually providing services to individual voters, beyond them being able to ask us questions. I mean, we set up a help desk and a call center to answer all the questions folks might have. But with our 31 people, we're not able to do things like, you know, help with individual transportation issues and things like that. But we do often refer them to other resources where folks might be providing that service. Within the state government, are your IT people exclusive to the Wisconsin Elections Commission? Yes, yes, we are. So another thing I'm really proud of is that I think we've been able to keep pace with the need in terms of technology. And since I've been in a leadership position, we have ensured that we're hiring who we need in our office to support our technology. So all the folks that support our IT systems are exclusive to the Wisconsin Elections Commission. That being said, there's still only 31 of us. It just means that we have to shift around how we utilize some of our positions that we're allowed. The state legislature decides how many positions each agency gets to have. And so we can say, okay, you've given us 31, we can decide how we utilize those 31. When I started with elections 10 years ago, we were mostly a policy shop. Most of the folks that worked in the agency were working on manuals and documentation. We had a lot of attorneys. Now I would say almost 80% of our agency is working on IT initiatives. And so it just shows you how quickly things have really changed. Then thank you very much for the compliments. I appreciate that. And then I see one from Marianne. As I listen on systems in place and having listened to parts of the Legislative Committee on Voter Fraud, knowing you testified, were you able to provide the system overview and protections you just provided us to the Legislative Committee? Great question. I have had those conversations with individual legislators, certainly over the years. I've had some opportunities to share that, but there has not been really an opportunity to talk about some of the great things that happen to protect technology related to voting in Wisconsin. So I look forward to those opportunities. I hope there are those opportunities, and I really hope that people will engage in some of these facts around, you know, all the great things that happen at the state and especially the local level to make sure that our elections are secure. So I'm always glad to have those conversations. I don't think I've ever said no to anybody that's asked me to come speak. This one is from Dan. Is WEC able to propose to the legislature any areas that need change based on actual on the ground data? So this is a bit of a complicated question too. So again, I'll always have conversations with anyone that would like to know how things work in elections. But in terms of the actual commission making any sort of recommendation about legislation, that has to go before my 6 commissioners. And they would need 4 votes to say that they support something. And so because they are partisan appointees, it can sometimes be difficult for them to have that common ground where they might feel comfortable making that sort of recommendation. But the commission did consider a legislative agenda, and they did convey that to the legislature. And there's actually been some bills over the years that deal with some technical cleanup items, just little drafting errors in the law that the commission asked the legislature to address. But that's, I wouldn't say a lot of times where we don't see a lot of action there in terms of the commission making a lot of recommendations to the legislature. Some of them might have individual conversations with their respective legislators, but there's, how were you able to manage that having exclusive IT people. So I'm not sure. We're an independent state agency. So how we're constructed as part of state law, we're not like other states where we're part of the Secretary of State's office. We're our own independent agency. And one of the things I think we're really fortunate about in elections is that people are interested in working for us. We're able to actually attract some good talent, people that want to work for us. So in state government, you don't get paid as well as you would in the private sector, especially in IT. There's no doubt about that. But I think we're able to attract a lot of people that genuinely have an interest in this and want to be a part of making sure our democracy is secure. And so we're able to usually put out recruitments, and we've been able to hire some really, really good folks that have that skill set. In terms of some of our IT developers, so people that do the coding, we've also been able to use some contract services, but that being said, they're still exclusive to our agency, even if we've hired them through a contract for some of those specialized skills. In my own prediction, will we have in Arizona? I'm not really sure how to answer that. And I think, you know, I think a lot of our local election officials might be contacted by outside groups trying to audit or look at their data. And so it seems like that's sort of a movement that's been happening in other places. There actually is an audit going on of the Elections Commission and of elections in Wisconsin right now. And so I don't know if folks are aware of that, but the Legislative Committee on Audits, the Joint Committee on Audits, actually voted to conduct an audit of Wisconsin elections. So that's going on right now as we speak. And so a lot of our time is spent getting them data and information as part of the Legislative Audit Bureau is the one that's conducting that audit right now. Any other questions?
Oops. Hearing none. Meagan, thank you so much for taking some time out of your morning to give us this education. That was extremely informative, and I'm really pleased that it is being recorded and will be posted on our website. So I might want to watch it again to learn a little bit more. But again, thank you. Thank everyone for sticking on, and go and have a nice day, and we'll see you hopefully before next year. Thanks again. Yay.
Thank you, Meagan, and all.
Meagan. That was wonderful. I'm going to forward it to my brother in Michigan, my very conservative brother.
Sandy, you can stop record.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
Public comment.
Yeah.